Is filled with wonders. Terrible, mysterious, beautiful. But in all the universe, there is no phenomenon more awe-inspiring than the incessant curiosity of man. Since man began inquiring, he has tried to unfold the secrets of the planet on which he lives. The physical properties of the Earth itself fascinate Professor J. Tuzel Wilson, geophysicist, even during his vacations at Georgian Bay, Ontario.
This is the crust of the Earth. It isn't very often that we see it so well as this, because it's usually covered with soil, the limestone. But here is the real stuff of which continents are made. And today, in the study of the Earth, we're not only able to look at the outside of the Earth, look all around, but we're able to see inside the Earth too. We have sorts of X-rays to examine the Earth, which are known as geophysical methods. One of these depends on the use of distant earthquakes. When an earthquake occurs, a big one, some other part of the world, the whole Earth is shaken, and the waves travel through the Earth. They take about 23 minutes to go right across it. They go right through the Earth, travel through it, and give us a picture of the inside. Of course, it's not a very perfect picture, but we're beginning to see something of what the whole Earth looks like. And the picture that is emerging looks almost like a soft-boiled egg in arrangement. You know how an egg has a shell on the outside, and then there's the white in a boiled egg that's solid, and in the center there's still a liquid yolk. Well, in the Earth we have corresponding to the shell, we have the crust. That's what we can see here. It's not very thick, and indeed some people are trying to drill a hole through it now. You've perhaps read about the efforts the Americans and also the Russians are making to drill holes through the crust to find out what's underneath, just like drilling through the shell of an egg. And this part below us, a few miles down, is called the mantle. We haven't actually seen it, but we know it's solid rock, and we have some ideas about it. It's probably dark, dense, heavy rock. And then about 1,800 or 2,000 miles down, we come to the core of the Earth. It corresponds to the yolk of the egg. And that part down there is liquid, white-hot iron in the center of the Earth. So we're gradually getting together a picture of what the Earth looks like. We wonder why the crust is so irregular. Why are the continents at different shapes, islands here and continents there, and oceans and water in different places? And one idea that seems to be helpful in that is to suggest that just as when one is boiling an egg, sometimes the egg cracks and some of the white comes out and hardens on the outside. So the Earth gets great fissures around it, great cracks on it. There's one right around the Pacific Ocean now, and volcanoes occur there, and material comes out from inside the Earth in the form of volcanoes. And when we add up the material, the amount of lava that comes out each year, and multiply that by the age of the Earth, which is tremendous, 3 or 4 billion years, we find that we get just about enough material coming out each year to, over the course of geologic time, this several billion years, to form the whole crust of the Earth. In making these investigations, we also find that it's impossible to make them just in one place. One must put the views of people all over the world together. And this was the origin of the International Geophysical Year. the geophysicists found that they couldn't just study the weather in one country. They had to study it everywhere simultaneously. And they couldn't study the oceans just from one country. And they couldn't study the surface of the Earth. So that they were forced to come together. And when they did come together, they found out that human beings are much the same all over the world, and that they can, over a plan like this that they're all interested in, cooperate very well. And last year, I was fortunate in being able to go around the world, to Russia, to meetings there in connection with the geophysical year, and also out to China, and to Formosa, and to Japan, and also to the Canadian Arctic and to the Antarctic. I traveled a tremendous amount. And everywhere I found that the scientists working in the geophysical year cooperated very well together. They were interested in common problems. I can remember in Antarctica stationed there and seeing French and Americans and Russians and Japanese and Argentinians and New Zealanders, English, all working very keenly together to find out more about the weather in Antarctica, which influences the rest of the world's weather. So that one realizes that though it was just a pure spirit of inquiry that prompted the geophysical year, and it prompts these investigations of the Earth, that they have two kinds of practical uses. One is, the Earth is our home and we live on it. We want to know more about it. We want to get minerals out of it. We want to use its soil. And mankind is getting so numerous, and the world is getting so contracted by ease of travel today that it's getting more and more important that we should make the best use of it. The other thing that is interesting and perhaps unexpected is that people who had a purely intellectual approach to the Earth find that in this way their passions are subdued, that they can cooperate together. They find out that other people are human beings. And if this idea of intellectual cooperation, rather than passionate hatred, could be extended, perhaps there is some hope that mankind could make better use and could live happily on this beautiful world that we can see around us, instead of destroying ourselves, as we otherwise may very easily do.
Surrounded by the rush and turmoil of the 20th century, the study of man's past goes on at the History Department of the University of Toronto. From a former mansion set in secluded grounds, Professor Maurice Careless directs inquiries into the world of yesterday, which can do much to illuminate man's actions today.
Man seeks naturally and normally to judge and form his opinions on the basis of experience. History is the written record of past experience. Yet history is such a mass of data, virtually inexhaustible, that we need an approach if we're going to do anything with it without being swamped. We need a viewpoint, a place to stand from which to ask questions of the past. There have been many such approaches used by historians in times past, and these are not necessarily disregarded. They're built upon as we move on in time. For instance, the so-called great man theory of history was used, where history was supposed to depend on such things as the length of Cleopatra's nose and whether or not Napoleon had stomach ulcers. Then, too, there's the national interpretation of history, which has seen a great deal of use, that history is a matter of the working out of the glorious national destiny of the Russians, the French, the Germans, or perhaps in our own country, the march of Canadians from colony to nation. I'm interested myself in a fairly new approach for looking at our past history, and that is the metropolitan approach, by which I mean really the study of the importance that great metropolitan centers, their rise and fall, have had during the course of our history. By a metropolitan center, I mean simply a great city, a large urban community which controls a large area of territory surrounding it, and this hinterland may contain many other towns and cities, but they are dominated by the central metropolis through control of communications. Now, mind you, communications can cover a great many things. Generally, one might think of metropolitan control as meaning the control of the trade of a great area, which is channeled through the metropolis. But as well, It may mean that the metropolis exercises financial control over the outlying hinterland, that certainly it can exercise political or governmental control. And beyond that, it may also be the center of cultural or intellectual control. Because, of course, communications not only carry goods or even people, they carry ideas. And when then you find, as you do more and more in the 20th century world, the concentration of power in certain great urban communities that do dominate a vast hinterland through their control of communications, then I think you have a phenomenon with which we must be very much concerned. And in our own country, we can see the operation of metropolitan forces. In fact, in some ways, we see it very clearly just because there were for so long few people here to get in their way. Sometimes it might seem that much of Canadian history, the fur trade era, is just simply the story, romantic though it is, of fur traders pushing across illimitable wastes of wilderness. But this fur trade empire that actually came to reach from one coast to the other, based on the fur trader's canoe, nevertheless exemplified a very close system of metropolitan control, which all channeled down to Montreal, and from there was linked across the ocean with, first of all, Paris as a metropolis, and later with London. And one can see the transference of Canada to British control in terms of the wresting away of the system of communications, the control of that system, from France and its transference to Britain and the London metropolis. Well, I could go on giving you examples, but I think it's more important to remind you that what I have said is very much an oversimplification of metropolitanism. There are many qualifications that I've neglected as I've presented it. Above all, I've neglected the role of the individual and human values. And history, after all, is fundamentally concerned with human values. It's a humanity, a study of man in his human environment and the things in which he is interested in this world. The object of the study of such a humanity, I think, is very much that of pure science as well. That is, to know for the sake of knowing. And really, that's what I find fascinating in the study of history, quite apart from whatever practical values it might have. And that's why, in my own limited way, I seek to inquire into it.
As elaborate as the earth itself, or as the written history of nations, is the complex social world created by man. At the Royal Ontario Museum, Dr. Ronald Cohen, anthropologist, studies the collected physical evidence of man's varied ways of life.
To anthropologists, Western society is only one example of all the societies that exist. And the customs and ways of life of peoples from all over the world form the basis of human experience as it is lived here on this planet. For example, I worked among the Kanuri of northeastern Nigeria, who live in a semi-arid region southwest of Lake Chad. They've got a society that's a feudal kingdom, goes well back, probably to the 7th or 8th century, and is one of the major West African kingdoms still in existence. It's much like the old empire of Timbuktu, although Timbuktu is now gone. And I wanted to record the customs, beliefs, social organization, family life, ceremonies of these people before these things died out. Their political system is very old, probably 1,000 years old. It's feudal. Each man in this society knows his place in this vertical hierarchy. No matter what kind of contact these people have with parts of Western society, its educational system, colonial rule, and so on, this system seems to be able to withstand an awful lot of contact. Indeed, until urbanization develops much more widely than it has at the present moment, I doubt very much whether this political system is going to change, even though Nigeria is getting its independence a year this October, October 1960. I also found that the cost of living in this society has gone up 100% in the last 10 years, while the cash income from the peanut crop, which is a cash crop, has gone up 600%. And this has changed the face of the countryside. The people now have flashlights, kerosene lamps, Western cloth manufactured in European factories. Well, the net effect of all this economic change is that these people, whether they know it or not, and most of them don't, have joined the international trading community. For example, Coca-Cola got to Africa about 6 months after I did. The world prices in peanuts. Farther south of them, palm oil. In Ghana, cocoa. Is going to affect the daily lives of these people, what they can do in terms of buying the things that they now want and feel they can't do without. The large development of trade, the enlarging trade, is producing a trader class that is becoming more and more politically conscious and will eventually do a lot of things to their indigenous political system when these people want a voice in government. What I want to say in summary is that I and other anthropologists, in gathering this data, are attempting to set up a body of literature out of which we hope to have a human laboratory for the study of man, his nature, and his works.
At the laboratories of the National Research Council in Ottawa, hundreds of scientists inquire into the physical properties of matter and apply the knowledge they obtain to human purposes. In so doing, the quality of their creative curiosity is all important. The president of the National Research Council is Dr. E.W. Stacy.
There are a lot of buildings here, and in these buildings there is a lot of expensive equipment. All told, this represents quite a major investment of the Canadian people in scientific inquiry. But I think one should emphasize that the important things are not the buildings or the equipment, but the people inside the buildings. In a laboratory like this, the important things that are done stem from the ideas of individual people. And the whole lab stands or falls on whether these are good people, whether they have ideas, or whether they don't. One hears quite a lot these days about the importance of the team. The implication is that the individual is no longer important, that the team approach is what counts. And I don't believe a word of this. Ideas still come from people. This is a team because we have a lot of people in one location, under one organization. But from a practical standpoint, it's a collection of individuals, and it's these individuals' ideas that count.
The modern university symbolizes the fact that the spirit of inquiry has never been as widespread and as well appreciated as in our times. We are coming to realize that men render an invaluable service to society when they seek to gratify their own curiosity, to learn more about this world and about the life that goes on in it. Dr. Hans Selye, director of the Institute of Experimental Medicine and Surgery at the University of Montreal, has formulated ideas as to the functioning of the human body, which have widely affected the practice of medicine. On the walls of the Institute's library are the collected results of 30 years of his inquiries and those of his colleagues. Basic research at the Institute probes close to the mechanisms of life itself.
Well, one of the difficulties with basic research is to recognize the valuable type of basic research at an early stage, before it has any general applicability, before it is turned over to those who do applied research. I think important basic research must have three characteristics, and it must have them at the same time when the discovery is made. It must be true, it must be surprising, and it must be generalizable. Take, for example, the work that we are doing right here at the Institute, the work I was doing when you came in. Well, we wanted to know more about growth, about the laws that stimulate tissue growth. And what interested us is that if you take a little tube like this, a glass tube, you see, open at both ends, and you just put that under the skin of an animal, somewhat like this, close it up again. When it's in there, it's all surrounded after a while by what we call connective tissue, the elastic tissue that's under your skin. And on both ends, these openings close up with a disc. And from the middle of the disc, they close up like this, you see. From the middle of the disc, a fine bridge goes across from the center of one disc to the center of the other disc. In other words, you have directed growth. You have forced it to take up a regular path, just like a diaphragm would force the light around us to take up a regular path and make parallel beams of light. So we have made parallel beams of connective tissue here. Well, the diaphragm was a basic instrument for the solution of the whole science that we now call optics. It would be impossible to televise this program without diaphragms in the cameras. We need some such diaphragm, some such mechanical directive influence in tissues in order to make this, to bring in the same precision into tissue growth that we can now bring into optics, and that now helps us in optics to make anything from microscopes to telescopes to cameras and so forth. That regularity, that reproducibility is an essential feature of a subject that the subject must acquire before it lends itself to scientific analysis. What are our problems? Well, I would like to know why our fingers grow out in cylinders like this. They might have actually been round, or we might have had them all together like this in one flap. Most people wouldn't worry about this. I mean, naturally, a human hand looks like this, and that's that. Well, I think basic researchmen are just so inclined, cursed by such curiosity, that they question everything. I don't know. I don't think this is natural. I think this is quite odd that they should be like this. The most natural growth pattern is just a ball that becomes bigger and bigger. Well, why do we have a nose, and why do we have ears? What directs tissues? Well, we hope with the use of such instruments, with which we have already been able to produce these fine bridges, and we can make communications between two bridges and solder them together like this, to elucidate this field quite a bit. For example, we can even change the constitution of the tissue. This was connective tissue, and it grows out from bridgehead of connective tissue to another one. But under certain conditions, just changing the shape of this, or the texture, or the size, we can make bone. We can, for example, in a rat, implant a tube like this under the back here, and have him have a horn-like bone as big as his foot would be, grow out, and it will have all the histological characteristics, the structure of a normal tubular bone, like the bone in my leg here. We can make fat tissue grow wherever we want it. We can make cartilage or bone marrow tissue grow just by changing the shapes of these things without injecting anything. We just put in mechanical objects which merely by stress and strain here or there on the tissue will guide both its shape and the quality of its structure. Well, this is one example of a basic research project which at the moment doesn't have any practical applicability, but we do think that perhaps if we learn more about the growth of tissues in these tests, we will also learn more about growth of tissues in man. Not only the structural development of the human body, not only would that help us also to improve the structural development when malformations occur, when it is damaged. We will learn more probably about wound healing, because that also is a similar phenomenon. But mainly, we are interested in applying this kind of research to cancer, because cancer is the most abnormal type of growth that seems to occur under certain conditions. These conditions have never been clearly elucidated. And it is not impossible, although that is still in the far future, that transformations of one tissue in another type, like connective tissue into bone or fat, are not the limits of what this instrument can accomplish, but that we might even get so-called malignant growth, and that would teach us more about how to inhibit malignant growth again. Well, this is one example of basic research to which the general principles seem to apply. It is true. It is certainly surprising, at least it was to me, and it seems to be generalizable since we have now acquired the power to modify by purely mechanical means so many types of tissues in so many types of animals and in so many qualitatively different ways. The basic scientist's main endeavor is to search for the kind of truth that can be verified by experience. I think that our age will probably go down in history as the age of basic research, because progress in basic research in this century is as characteristic of our time as stone, bronze, or iron was in the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, respectively. In demonstrating our appreciation of human values to the next generation, we must educate our children to understand that from now on, man's great wars will not be fought with muscle. His battles will not be won by the glorious, intoxicating, momentary courage to face a bayonet and to die for a cause. Our children must learn that the great victories in peace and war will be won by warriors of a different stamp, men of intellectual vigor, and by the sober, persistent dedication of their entire lives. They will have to learn that it is far more difficult to live than to die for a cause.
Today, the ordinary citizen, as well as the professional scholar, must question constructively the world about him, if solutions are to be found to the complex problems of our age. In so doing, he will share what inquiring minds have experienced since ancient times: the excitement of learning, the joy of discovery, the power of knowledge. Nothing is sweeter than the light of truth.